to Horizons of Thought. Today, I'm going to talk about cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation is one of them highfalutin words. It's actually a cover term for a lot of different concepts, and it's worth understanding what those concepts are. The first one is stolen valor or stolen honor. Imagine you're a U.S. Marine. You've signed up, you've gone through the very difficult boot camp, you've then learned a specialist trade, you've gone off to a war in Afghanistan or Iraq or another war zone, you've served your country with dignity and worked very hard, and then you come back home to go to a military parade, and there's this town poser who's wearing your uniform, who's wearing fake medals that they didn't earn when you did. And you find out who this poser is. You're going to be very upset about this person because they have claimed for themselves honor and hard work that they did not earn. And the same thing happens with other cultures. It might seem innocent to wear a little feather inside a headband, but in some cultures, an eagle feather in a headband is something you only get to wear when you're a brave, and you only get to be a brave when you serve for many years in an indigenous military. Same thing. Here in New Zealand, there are these facial tattoos called Moko, and these facial tattoos have meaning. They will represent what is called your whānau or your family. They will represent your mana or your honor. And it's not a good idea just to put on a facial tattoo that isn't part of your family or that isn't part of something you've earned. And this is an issue that people struggle with all over this country because there are many people who've done so. This kind of stolen valor makes people upset, and it's worth understanding why it is that it would make people upset. Another kind of thing that happens is that you might find yourself making fun of people by the outfit that you wear. There will be cases where a version of an outfit from another culture is made that's done poorly, and somebody puts them on and then they act out stereotypes or walk around in this thing dishonoring the original art form and the quality of the work. It's easy to be upset by something like that if for no other reason than it's aesthetically displeasing. But it can also be just a mean thing to do to people, and it's worth thinking about this sort of behavior. Another thing that I would mention is even taking ideas. What do you think of the notion of Kim Kardashian making a line of clothing that she called kimono? Maybe that offends you, maybe that doesn't, but you should be able to understand why somebody might be offended by something like that. Because if for no other reason, it's really tacky. So, the next thing I would talk about is theft of knowledge. The very term cultural appropriation refers to the idea of stealing knowledge that belongs to somebody else. And this can sound ridiculous because the truth of human existence is that we actually borrow cultural ideas that are good from people all the time. But there are cases where a language might be dying out, or there are very few sources of this information left. And you can literally take that information and not give credit to the people from which that information came from. And that can be thought of and actually might even be direct theft. This is cultural appropriation by its own name. But at the same time, as I've said, and I would say again, cultures learn from each other all the time. And in fact, your ideas, your words, your slangs, the things you do in your culture might actually be honored when other people take them. It's very common historically for African Americans or homosexuals to come up with clothing or terms or ways of speaking that people in the wider community find interesting and then take and use and dilute down so that the same communities that came up with these terms are going to come up with new cool terms. But that's part of the process of actually doing something that people around you honor, that they'll take your ideas and do them not as well as you did, and you being at the forefront of the creation of various cultural artifacts are going to go make new ones. And so there are many cases where it can seem bothersome to do this kind of thing, but people actually respond really well to this. Yeah, well, we're in the lead. Of course, people are going to take our ideas and we're going to make new ideas and we're still going to be in the lead. And that's something worth remembering when you think of cultural theft and the extension of it. So the last thing I want to talk about, though, is when you think of notions of cultural appropriation, whether you're talking about cultural theft, making fun of people, or engaging in stolen valor, it's also worth really understanding what's going on when you look at an activity that came from another culture, and don't guess. Because I've definitely seen many cases where people are offended by what they think of as cultural appropriation, and they've completely guessed either as to the origin of a particular thing or as to what the originating culture thinks of other people using it. And I'll give two examples. You will definitely hear people who've criticized people who are not of African heritage, and particularly people who are not of Jamaican heritage, for wearing dreadlocks. It's common to see dreadlocks as something that are African American and particularly Jamaican because of Rastafarianism in particular. But dreadlocks are something that humans can do with their hair, regardless of whether their hair is curly or straight, because all human hair, like animal hair, can be felted. And when you felt something, you basically scrunch it up in such a way that it can actually form bundles upon itself. And so pretty much any human hair can be felted into the shape of dreadlocks. And it's important to remember that because dreadlocks have actually been invented by a multitude of human cultures, of every skin color, of every background, of every latitude on the earth and every location on the earth, because this is a thing that can be done with our hair for many people of many different cultures. Another one that matters a lot is I saw a case at the University of Toronto where there was a group of yoga instructors who were teaching yoga to people with disabilities. And they got outed by a university student group who were upset that they saw this yoga as cultural appropriation. And particularly, they saw the idea that there were too many white women engaging in yoga. But the yoga that we do in any exercise environment all around the world is not even the whole of a practice in relation to the Hindu religions where it comes from, but it's actually what is called a asana practice, where you practice the poses. There's often much, much more that underlies these religions. So you might think it's not such a good idea to take a tiny part of religion and ignore the rest of it. But there's actually been an enormous amount of effort by the Indian government and many different Hindu groups. Billions of dollars have been spent trying to convince people all around the world to actually do this asana practice and to engage in yoga as a form of exercise, as well as a form of spiritual enlightenment. So you might find yourself being offended by something when the originators of the idea aren't offended at all. It's worth knowing what people care about and what they don't care about when you decide what to and not to be offended about. I'm going to give you a third example, and this one's really crazy to me. I've heard people complain about mathematics as being too white. You have to know very little about mathematics and mathematical symbolism to actually think something like that. Because one of the reasons why people find it so difficult to learn complicated math formulas and to follow what's going on is because those formulas are made from symbols that come from a multitude of different cultures, and they're made up from the ideas of many different cultures. In mathematics, you can see ideas from the subcontinent of India. You will see many ideas from Hungary. You will see ideas from the Greek philosophers. You'll see ideas from the Romans. You'll see ideas from French and German and English people. You'll see ideas from North America. Now you'll see many new mathematical ideas and concepts have come out of Asia and Southeast Asia in many countries in many different forms. Math is a massively multicultural activity, and it comes from many different groups of people. It's actually part of the reason why it's hard, because the notations and the forms and the ways of thinking that underlie the various notions we have in math come from many different peoples who have many very different ways of thinking. And it makes it very complicated to learn these things because you often don't know the origins of where math comes from. And if you're worried about such things, I think it's actually a good idea to find out the origins of the various aspects of math that you're studying. Because one, you'll actually get a lot better at math if you do that. And two, you'll find out the difference between checking and guessing in relation to whether you're going to be offended by something. So I hope today what you take from this discussion of cultural appropriation is an understanding that there are very real and very nasty things that are talked about when people use the term cultural appropriation. But there are also cases where people really don't know what they're talking about because they don't themselves understand the various cultures they're talking about, or they overly essentialize people from other cultures. You know yourself, whatever group you live in, that it's a very diverse group full of people who think very differently about things. But it's easy to imagine that that wouldn't be the case for people from other parts of the world. But it's true everywhere. We're very diverse within any cultural division you want to make, as well as across those divisions. So always check and do not just guess. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Horizons of Thought. I am very sorry that it had been a long time since I've talked. I have been incredibly busy with a lot of academic work in the last several months, to be honest. And I hope that I get back to these and produce more of these episodes at a faster rate in the future. So I hope to see you in a week or two.